Yeah, so I'm doing something hopefully slightly different today. Can games cure everything? About how video games can contribute to scientific and medical research. So I've said before, we all come here because we love games. We can see the positive benefits they have in our lives. They all impact us in different ways, but really they're actually a very useful tool that have much broader applications within society. So I want to talk about how they are used, the potential uses of those, and why they're such a great thing for everybody in the whole world, basically. So obviously there's a lot you can say about how games benefit us, how they benefit society, how they benefit the world, but I'm focusing on science and medicine because that's my specialty. I graduated with a degree in biochemistry and I work in medical publishing, so it's kind of my, I won't go as far as to say expertise, but apparently I'm supposed to know something about it. I just ran video games into PubMed. It's a database where basically not all, but supposedly the good scientific and medical research goes up there, so everyone can find it and access it, and you search for keywords to find what you're looking for. So I just ran video games and came up with nearly 4,000 articles, so you can see that actually this is quite a big thing. And going through them, I found that they kind of fit into these three categories. There's those where video games is used in research, in basic research, those to educate mostly medical professionals, but perhaps also the general population about different areas of medicine, and those where video games are actually used as part of the therapy. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of each of those, and within that I found that they are kind of further separated into those where they were purpose-built games, so the game was actually designed for a specific purpose within the research community, or those where just the act of playing a game is supposedly has, this kind of fits into the therapy where the playing the game is what the research is about. So I'm starting off talking about a specific game called Foldit. I don't know, has anyone ever heard of this? Oh, good. Have you played it? How'd it go? Oh, good. So what it is, it probably doesn't sound very interesting if you're not into biology, but it's a game where you get to fold proteins. So the reason we want to know the structures of the proteins and the reason we play around with them is because by knowing how a protein is shaped, that kind of gives an indication to its structure. So taking you back a little bit to GCSE biology, proteins are made of long chains of amino acids, but they exist in 3D structures, and there's a few rules about how they're shaped, and you get scored on this. So you manually put them together. You want to pack the protein as small as you can, so you don't want empty spaces. There's certain chains which are hydrophobic, so you've got to make sure they're in the middle, and you want to make sure that you're not having two chains next to each other that aren't supposed to be next to each other. And you get scored on that, which, it's not a very exciting game, folding proteins. But it does have quite a specific reason why they've made this into a game. So if we can predict how a protein's structured, that can give us an indication of its function, because sometimes we have proteins, we're not sure how they work, we're not sure why they work. And really, proteins are just an essential part of life, a part of biochemistry of health and disease. So the more we know about them, the more we can, find drugs that will target these and, that can affect the function of these proteins. So they're using the general population to fold these proteins to predict the best way that they're going to be put together, and also using the data they're getting from people putting these proteins together to try and create computer algorithms from it, so that hopefully in the future we don't need to kind of crowdsource this kind of information. And going forward, protein engineering, it's just a lot easier when you get people to do it, and once you understand these basic rules, then you can kind of start looking into that side of things. A lot of this is taken off the website, which I've put at the top if you want to read a bit more about it. But these just are kind of 3 big diseases which are really heavy on proteins, as in like proteins are an essential part of how these diseases operate. HIV being a virus, which is essentially proteins which affect other proteins and creates proteins. Cancer can be caused by irregular protein replication or when proteins stop working properly. And Alzheimer's, one of the causes, they think, is to do with protein aggregation in the brain. So the more we can understand about the proteins involved in these diseases, the more we can, go forward finding cures for them. So yeah, that's the first example of a game that's specifically been built, although game is probably a little bit generous. But the second one, this is developed by Cancer Research UK. It's called Play to Cure Genes in Space. Has anyone heard of this one? You have? Have you played it? Yeah, it's one you get for your mobile. You just download it for free off the App Store. And the kind of interface is you're in this little spaceship. You have to map out a route, and then you have to go around collecting this stardust or something or whatever. But what you're actually doing is you're analyzing genetic data from thousands of tumors, which has been, they've done micro arrays of it to get all these gigabytes and gigabytes of data, which would take scientists years and years to get through. So they've, through some kind of wizardry, they've made it into a game so that they can get us normal people to do it for them. But yeah, it came as a result of a game jam, actually. So a whole bunch of companies got together, put their heads together, and thought, how can we make a game that's going to, help fight cancer? And yeah, that's what I said. I won't go into science because it's not very interesting. But wizardry, tumors, that's the gist of it. But yeah, I think they're kind of using this as a platform to maybe try and create more games like this to try and help people analyze massive amounts of data. So moving on away from specific games, I'm just going to quickly talk about simulators, which have a lot of uses in a lot of different areas of science. I've just put a few there. So population epidemiology studies. Who's ever played one of those games where there's like a zombie outbreak and you have to put in where it starts and how many people are affected? So that's based on real epidemiology data, and actually you can use that in reverse and you can kind of put measures in and see how that's going to affect the spread of the virus. And what happens if I change X, if I change Y. Systems biology and bioinformatics. This is not so much games, but it's about using computer algorithms to kind of analyze data, to kind of see how drugs will affect the body. But I put it in there because it's quite like an important precursor to how games and science come together. Psychology, if you're doing psychology experiments, it's quite easy just to create a simulation, stick someone in front of a computer and see how they react. There's umpteen examples of that. And surgical training, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a second. But yeah, surgeons actually use computer simulations because obviously it's quite dangerous for someone who's never done surgery before to do surgery on a real person. So there's just no way around it. They have to practice. So that's where simulators come in. So this is a lot of words, which I'm not going to read. Basically, I was working on a journal a couple of years back, and I interviewed this guy who was the head of the British Interventional Radiology Society or whatever, and he used to head up training for interventional radiologists in the UK. And so I asked him, what are the biggest challenges when you're going through training? And he said about the risk of doing surgery on real people, and how he wants to see a greater use of simulation. And he was saying about you can use specific data to kind of upload it into kind of have a sort of template scenario, I guess, and then upload specific data so you can have really specific practice sessions so that, a student surgeon could do a procedure 20 or 30 times before ever actually having to try to do it on a real person, which makes me sleep better at night. But yeah, he was saying he wants to see it develop a little bit more because obviously the more realistic you get it, the better it's going to be for the students and for the patients. And then he went to talk about this thing called the Hull Immersive Visualization Environment. Has anyone heard of that? Anybody from the University of Hull? Which it's basically this big virtual environment that they've created, which they use for several different purposes. I'm going to talk about another one in a minute. But he was saying that he wants to work with them to create this fully immersive operating theatre, basically, where a student can go in and practice as if they were doing the real thing, but with no risk at all involved to the other people. So that's that. The next bit is about therapy, specifically virtual reality. I'm guessing a lot of you might have seen this before, about how they use video games in post-traumatic stress disorder. So one of the ways to get over anxiety disorders in general is what they call immersion therapy. So they literally just chuck you into a scenario and you have to deal with it. And particularly for soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, they've created a number of games where they have to just relive these scenarios that they've been through, basically, just to help them deal with it. And I was reading through some of the testimonials, and these people were saying, you know, not only has it helped them, but one guy said, being able to relive this in the game means that I can then go home to my family and not think about it, because I've got a kind of specific time and a place I can go and I can deal with it. And it just kind of helped him get through it that way. I've put if anyone's interested, I've just put a citation to a paper which does a really good analysis and overview of how this helps. And another one which is very similar, I mentioned about Hive. This is actually just a student project about using this virtual environment to help people deal with social phobias. And it deals with the same thing as immersion therapy. So you stick them in a room with people and just make them deal with it. It reminds me a bit of something Christos said a few months back, where he just wanted a kind of simulator, but someone's actually already done it. So yeah, I mean, that's what someone did for their BSc project. So if you could get fully trained professionals together to work on something like this, and I think the possibilities could be endless in helping people treat anxiety disorders. This is me. I told you that I found over 4,000 articles relating to video games and PubMed, and I've just pulled off just a few titles just so you can see the breadth of what is going on with video games in medicine. You can see at the top about how they've been trying to use video games to encourage children to eat healthily. This is what they call serious video games, so it's a game with like a serious, it's not a fun game, I guess, but it's still a game. Using them to help nurses. Again, you can create like simulated environments. What happens if this goes wrong? What happens if that goes wrong? Active video games, using the Kinect and the Wii to help combat obesity, and also adolescents with cystic fibrosis who need to get a bit of exercise, but obviously it can be quite difficult for them. Analysing whether video games can play a role in that. Same thing, but for older adults, helping them gain back function. And then there's just a few. This one is a weird one about helping people with an eye disease. You have like a video game, but it sounded cool, but I don't understand it. And yeah, just general reviews of how games are being applied to healthcare and how this can move forward in the future. But yeah, I said there's plenty of room to move forward. Sorry, it's a bit blurry, but basically, this study went to a bunch of therapists and said, do you think video games could help your patients? And the conclusion was potentially yes, but it's just not there yet. We need more of this, we need that. They just said there wasn't anything age appropriate, there was nothing sophisticated enough, but it's something that they wanted to see. So it's good that health professionals can see the potential of how video games can be helping people. So yeah, the take-home message of this really is that it would be quite nice to inspire some game developers. If you're looking for something a bit of a challenge, something a bit different, and you want to make a difference, and try to team up with some scientists, some medical professionals, try something a little bit different, create a game with a larger purpose, go forth and cure the world. And that is me. Thank you.